Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Maine Take. My name is Dana Connors, and I'm pleased to be your host for this weekly program brought to you by the Maine State Chamber of Commerce. And this week, as in the past weeks, we are sharing with you people, programs, and issues at work in play, as they say, helping to make our state a better place and affect the lives of Maine people. We begin today's program with two very special guests to discuss the results of two surveys that they have recently conducted that affect our economy, and they are news that we are all anxious to hear about. And those two guests are friends, shall we say, Corey King, as well as Tony Cameron. Let me first of all introduce them in a little bit more detail. Corey is a brother, so to speak, in the Chamber of Commerce business, representing the region of Southern Midcoast Maine. And Tony Cameron, also a friend, is the CEO of Maine Tourism Association. Thank you both very much for taking the time to be with us. This is news that we are anxious to share with people who certainly have spent a lot of time, a lot of anxiety in this past year in dealing with what we all know as the pandemic of 2020. That's not quite over yet, but as we like to say, we can almost see the end from here if we stay diligent. So Corey, let's first of all talk about the MACE, the Maine Association of Chamber of Commerce Executives. I say it's a chamber survey, but we all in the chamber world recognize the hard work that went into this survey as well as one previous. I'm struck by the previous one and the timing of that, which was kind of in the middle of the pandemic year of 2020. And that survey really brought forward how the consumer, the customer, was really committed to making sure that this pandemic lasted as short a time as possible, and how businesses also took up the responsibility. But now we have a different survey at a different time. It's the beginning of 2021. Tell us about the findings.
Well, Dana, thanks for having me, and thanks to both you and Tony for partnering with MACE on the survey. So the survey was called the 2021 Moving Forward Business Survey, and it was our three organizations. When I say our organizations, MACE is the Maine Association of Chamber of Commerce Executives, which is basically the staff people from the chambers of commerce around the state, as well as some trade association folks who are part of MACE. But it's basically local and regional chambers. So we wrote the survey jointly together, partly because we all wanted to get some answers on our own and said, rather than doing three surveys, let's combine them and just do one. The survey went out in December. The idea of the survey was to get businesses' perspective at the end of 2020, heading into 2021, so we could provide this information to legislators. And I will say, the legislators have received this either through their local regional chamber person or through me directly. So that's great news. 514 businesses from 35 industries participated in the survey, and there's just it's dense. I mean, it's 6 different sections focusing on everything from hiring practices to what their business needs are to major business issues and how they were affected by COVID. But we've got some really interesting data that's come from that.
Yeah, and let's begin with the employment changes. I was struck by the fact that, frankly, I'd anticipated perhaps a greater loss, a greater impact. So share what the findings were as it related to the employee.
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of the funding program, well, let me say 56% of businesses say they have the number of employees that they need right now. And a third said that they needed more. So businesses saying that they have, what they need right now is really an interesting idea, because I expected it to be a lot different. And whenever you create these surveys, you always think it's going to be, you have ideas of where the answers are going to go, and then they go a different direction. So that was interesting. Still, I mean, there are a third of businesses that are looking for folks, which is, still a significant number. And I think, as Tony's going to allude to in a little bit, we saw a subset of tourism businesses that are in more of a dire need in terms of employees.
Yeah, let's bring Tony in. Tony, you too did a survey. You were part of the MACE, and you also conducted one that followed a similar effort to try to gauge the spirit as well as where we stood as a tourism industry. What was your findings, basically?
Yeah, well, thanks, Dana, for having me on here. And before I get to that question, Corey, I just want to compliment you on all the hard work that goes into these types of surveys. The amount of work and effort. If anybody knew how much Corey had spent on this, it's mind blowing. And I think it goes to speak to a lot of the work that a lot of the chambers do around the state. That there's a lot of things that people just think happen. And they happen because of people like Corey and Dana and the chambers around the state. So kudos to you guys. But regarding our survey in particular, we did it right after the announcement from the governor on March 5th to kind of get an up-to-date feeling and scope of the perspective of the industry from around the state, from all segments. As some of you may know, we represent all segments of the industry, hotels, retail, attractions, cultural events, the full gamut of the industry. And this hasn't been a one-size-fits-all way that the pandemic has affected businesses. There's been different levels of how things have affected businesses. But overall, a lot of the businesses are feeling pretty optimistic about the season, especially after getting that clarity and those travel restrictions and the capacity levels announced, and knowing that plan moving forward. Obviously, things can still can change and situations can adapt, but as of right now, things are looking pretty positively. 69% of the respondents were looking that this was going to be a much better year than last year. I mean, obviously, we know that almost anything that happens this year is going to be better than last year. But we also wanted to compare it to 2019 levels. And so we know that bookings on a majority level are still lagging a little bit behind those 2019 levels, but they're picking up. And we're hearing that more and more. And so that's really encouraging. We know that as soon as that announcement hit, reservations started to come in.
Yeah, let me, in your study, I was reading that there's still, not surprising. I mean, we've come a long ways. We're not quite at the finish line yet, but we're encouraged that we're going to get there, which is different than it was. Because one of the biggest concerns that all three of us used to hear from our members was, guys, if I only knew when this is going to be over, I could plan for it. Well, it's not over, but we can see the finish line. And I was struck by, in your survey, you mentioned with that uncertainty that still exists, there are certain factors that are in the back of people's mind. And I was struck by that. Can you share those with our viewers as to what those concerns were? What would matter to them if?
Yeah, well, it's kind of, when it goes for a business perspective, it's kind of trying to figure out what the guest wants for information. And it also goes into planning for them as far as, what do I need to do for marketing? What do I have to do for hiring? What do I have to do for the procedures and protocols? And when it comes to the procedures and protocols, I think that one thing that puts us in a much better position this year than last year is we already have those tried and true protocols put in place. And a lot of the visitors have those expectations that these things are going to be put in place when you go into a restaurant or to a hotel or whatever. But those are some of the things that the general economic uncertainty, potential of cancellations, obviously weigh heavily on if there's a variation that happens to take control over a certain region, especially here in New England, that could have devastating effects and set us backwards, of course. The vaccine and having people vaccinated, having that clarification was a big thing on the businesses' minds, and visitors too. That was the number one question that we received at the Tourism Association when fielding phone calls and emails from visitors was, if I'm vaccinated, can I come? And so it was great to get that clarification. But for businesses, having this information and be able to plan for marketing, staffing, right now is huge. And we know that staffing is going to be a major challenge.
For sure. Let me go back to you, Corey, but I'd also ask this of view as well, Tony, is that we've seen a different way of working, flexible hours, virtual meetings, and so forth. Do you anticipate, either one of you? Well, first of all, Corey, I think you asked that question, and I'd be interested in a response. But from your industry sectors and those you represent, do you see this as leaving a pathway forward in which there'll be more virtual and more flexibility in the workplace?
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right. Question 19 asked that exact question, which is, are there positive business changes that you're going to take from COVID-19? We had 68% of businesses mentioned one thing or another. The top two most frequent responses, I think, are interesting, but not as interesting as the next two, actually. Almost 60%, about 6 in 10 said they're going to keep the new cleaning and sanitizing protocols. That seems pretty reasonable and pretty understandable. Secondly, 4 out of 10 said that they're going to keep more Zoom meetings and more remote meetings, which is interesting, but not as interesting as 1 in 4 said that they're going to keep with flexible scheduling and remote workspaces. And when you think about the world before COVID-19, flexible scheduling and remote workspaces, that was mostly theoretical at that point.
Yeah.
You had 1 in 10 businesses maybe considering it. And now to see 1 in 4 are going to do that. And then if you extrapolate out which industries just can't even do that. I mean, you can't have remote servers at restaurants. So when you look at just the percentage of available, I mean, it's closer to maybe even 1 in 3 businesses that are going to keep it. But with that, which I think is great, I think if there's some childcare things that came to light during the pandemic too, that remote work helps with. But then, are we going to lose some of that teamwork and connectedness, of not being on site? And how do you, generate that through Zoom? So there's going to be a whole other set of things that come with it. But yeah, it's definitely something that's here to stay, and I don't think we're going to see it go back on.
Tony, did he just kind of answer your question as well? When I think of your industry and the interaction of people and responsibilities, I have to ask the obvious question: can that work for your industry?
No, we're in the hospitality industry. I mean, it revolves around the interactions and the customer service, and that's a big part. And the other side of that is, let's not forget that travel is tourism, and the two go hand in hand, travel and tourism. And the business segment of the traveling segment is going to lag going with recovering because of all these new ways that we've learned how to do business. And we know that when you travel for business, you often take a few extra days sometimes, or you bring your family. And so that's going to be a loss to the industry. And we know that segment's going to take much longer to come back, along with the group tours and the cruise ships and things of that nature. What we're going to see come back first in the industry is the individual travelers. But just kind of taking it to a different kind of perspective with the remote working, it's gonna affect travel.
Yeah. Oh, I can certainly see that. Another interesting finding, Corey, was the financial impact that you were able to provide in terms of what it would take to help businesses survive or to address the modifications or the personal protection equipment. Share that as well, if you would. I think that's very meaningful.
Yeah, that was one of the biggest takeaways for me, is we asked people this, a little bit of a tricky question, but basically it was, with the current business culture and the sales you're expected to do over the next year, how much in additional funds would you need to guarantee that you'll be open 1 year from today? And the average came back at 65,000, actually 66,000. But yes, so I mean, 65,000 on top of other revenue is a staggering number. And then we asked 2 other questions about building modifications made to meet COVID protocols and PPE reimbursements, and that came in at 6,000 and 4,000. So that's that's $10,000 there. And as you look at this the funds that are coming to the state from the American Rescue Plan, is there a policy? Is there something that we can do to help businesses that are having those issues? And I think the numbers were even even more severe for you, Tony.
Right, and Corey, you again did a fantastic job of separating some of the travel and tourism businesses out of there, and that dollar amount was up to 85,000 on average for the tourism and hospitality businesses. So, you know, we knew that they were all hit hard, and having a dollar amount on what's going to take to help them recover this year, on top of what they're already thinking that they're going to generate for revenue, it's staggering that, you know, we're a ways away, although things are looking up. We're not there yet, and but it's good to be able to do these surveys and get some hard figures for it.
Well, and those numbers end up being encouraging, because once again, you've got definition as to what's needed, so you can try to seek those funds to help, or what it's going to take to actually find that finish line, so to speak. Another thing you alluded to, Tony, early on in our discussion here today was something that I'd love to have you expand a bit on, and that is because not as many people came to the state last year, and because of the anxiety about that continues, maybe not in Miami on College Week, but for the rest of the country, there is that anxiety about, well, is it safe to go, and is it right time to go? But I heard you say, and I think it's extremely important, that we make every effort to market the state, that it's open, it's safe, and all of that. And you mentioned, I think, the tourism fund. Can you expand upon that?
Yeah, well, we knew that last year because it was a down year. The way that the tourism marketing fund is generated is a percentage of meals and lodging tax. And so when that's down, that's going to affect the fund. And we wanted to make sure that that funding was going to stay whole this year. That was incredibly important, because we know that we absolutely need to be marketing the state of Maine in order to make sure that we can welcome people safely. And this is not the time to be letting off the accelerator by any means, because other places are going to be full force on trying to attract people to come. We want the message to be responsible, of course, and working with the Maine Office of Tourism to be able to do that. But we were incredibly pleased that we were able to work with the administration and both sides of the aisle to make sure that the tourism funding was going to stay whole, and to be able to make sure that the funds that went unspent last year rolled over and went back into that fund this year. And that's incredibly important for the success of the industry, not just for tourism businesses, but for all of Maine. We know that it's when we're marketing Maine and people are coming here, it's a great way to really show what a great state we are to live in. And so it's a marketing tool, not just for tourism, but for people to relocate.
Absolutely.
Life here.
Yep. And the pandemic has brought that awareness, and we just continue to need to market it for sure. Guys, I hope your members know how incredibly special you both are in your respective positions. And I can say you're incredibly good to work with, both of you. And it's a pleasure to have you on today. And for Corey in the Southern Midcoast, that represents the communities of Bath, Brunswick, Topsham, and beyond. And for you, Tony, that represent the tourism industry as broad as it is long, as my dad used to say. I thank you both. And we all know that tourism is important to both of you, but it's also important to the entire state. When you think of, they say 8 billion, I would argue that in this past year with the supply chain that it represents, it's vastly more than that in terms of its impact. So great job, guys. Appreciate you being on today, and thank you so much for doing so.
Thank you, Dana.
Take care.
Dana, thank you so much. One last note, if anybody wants to see the survey results, the MACE website has it. It is MACE, MACCE .biz, B-I-Z, mace.biz. And thanks so much for having us.
Thank you, guys. It's now my pleasure to turn our attention to a new edition that I am hoping to have on every week about this same time. As part of our program, that person is Peter Van Allen. He happens to be the editor of Mainebiz. And for all of us in Maine, we know exactly what Mainebiz, and we're very proud of its existence. But for those outside of our listening or outside of our state who may be listening today, we want you to know that it's a highly respected and certainly a business magazine that clearly looks at providing us the latest in news as well as analysis. So I've asked Peter to come on a weekly basis to talk about what's new, what may be the hottest article going from his point of view in the Mainebiz. So Peter, welcome to the show, and tell us.
Thank
what's
you.
hot in Maine this week from Maine business point of view?
Well, thanks, Dana. Thank you. I appreciate being on the Maine Take and with Dana Connors. And as a very generous introduction for Mainebiz, I appreciate that as well. I thought this week, the story that everybody seems to be talking about in the business world is Puritan Medical Products. And this is a company that probably a lot of people didn't know about before last August. It's a privately held company based in Guilford. It had sales before the pandemic of about 45 million. It's really owned by one family. And they were called upon because they are one of the only companies that makes these kind of swabs that they use for COVID tests. There's another company in Italy, but they rose to prominence very quickly last summer. The Trump administration kind of got wind of the fact that they were one of the only ones making these swabs. They were quickly asked to ramp up their production by millions of swabs within a just a couple of weeks' time. And really what happened is an incredible story, I think, especially for Maine. They ended up building 2 factories in Pittsfield. They worked with Chinbro, Maine's largest construction company, to find the sites and to get them outfitted. They worked with Bath Iron Works, which is normally, as you know, making ships, to build the production equipment. And it was by the way, it was the first time they had gone outside the company to get help building the sort of production equipment that they needed to make these swabs. And I underscore, like, millions of swabs. And they were able to get these factories up and running just within a matter of months, and to the point now where they're going to expand production. It was reported by Bloomberg last week that they're looking at Tennessee for another factory. And so this is something that's just, they were responsible, and they got federal contracts for I think 140 million. There's some estimates that it's even higher than that. And so this was the type of thing. I mean, they had to really step on the gas and get these factories underway. And by the way, they hired, I think it was 800 or 900 people. They have a workforce of about 1,300 people, which is, as you know, very hard to do. It's even harder as you get the further north in Maine to just find people who are qualified to work in these factories. So it's a pretty incredible story. Do it like kind of toot our own horn a little bit. So Scott Wellman, we honored Scott Wellman. This is the Business Leaders of the Year, which just hit the newsstands today. And we honored the general manager of Puritan, Scott Wellman, who was oversaw a lot of the production of these, getting these factories up and running, and is now doing the site selection process in Tennessee to figure out where they're going to do a factory down there. So we honored them. As I mentioned, I mean, it's been kind of a hot media story outside of the Maine market. So Bloomberg had a big story last week about, and this kind of got into a little bit of the family feud, different parts of the family that own this company. But a really pretty lengthy story. Business Week has done stories on them. Inc. magazine gave them an award, one of their top company awards. So it's been pretty interesting to follow all of this, to say the least.
Oh no, it's a great story, a great start, and we look forward every week to having something as significant as that, Peter. So that's a high bar you set, but we're also very, very thankful that it happened right here in Maine. And when they say things can happen in those small towns and those rural areas, well, their presence to begin with, where it all started, was in Guilford, Maine, and I think we're all very proud, and we love the attention that they're getting all across our country. And Scott Wellman is very, very deserving of that honor. So thank you for being with us. And we look forward to another story just like this one next Monday at around the same time. So thanks, Peter. We'll look forward to seeing you next week.
Thank you.
And now on a little more of a somber note, I'm not that my team is of that nature, but they have responsibilities sometimes that touch upon some issues that challenge all the good things we've heard so far. They're extremely good at what They do, and even though that's self-serving on my part, I know it to be true. So the three, as you've met before, but let me repeat who they are. Peter Gore, Executive VP, oversees human resource. Ben Gilman is our general counsel and also president of our foundation, but also has energy, utilities, environment, as well as workforce. And Linda Caprera has our taxation and appropriations budget related issues. So without further ado, Peter, what's happening in your world this week?
Thanks, Dana. Big public hearing today on LD 607, the bill that would increase Maine's salary threshold, that dividing line between people who are eligible, who are hourly employees and eligible for overtime versus those employees who are considered exempt or salaried employees. This is a bill that was died on the table when the legislature adjourned in 2019. It's back this year. It's worse this year. It would add considerable cost to doing business here in Maine, and it would make us second only to California in terms of the size of the salary threshold. And as you all know, if California were a country, it'd have the 5th largest economy in the world. So it's not a place where Maine wants to be. A lot of long public hearing today, about 4 hours worth of testimony. A lot of businesses testified in opposition to the bill. We'll have a similar public testimony on and hearing on Wednesday when we take up 553, the bill that would end at-will employment in Maine. The at-will doctrine has been one in which employers in Maine have operated under for decades. This bill would replace it with a for-cause termination standard. Only one state in the country uses a pure for-cause termination standard. There are a number of protections for employees that employers must follow, including the Maine Human Rights Act, the Federal Civil Rights Act, the Whistleblower Act, National Labor Relations Act, all these different protections that forbid an employer from hiring someone for the wrong reason. This bill would really make it difficult to get rid of an employee, even one that may have committed a crime in the workplace or was engaged in unethical, behavior in the workplace. So we'll have a public hearing in that on Wednesday. Those are the two biggest labor bills of the session so far. We'll see where they end up. Ben?
Yeah, thanks, Peter and Dana. And a bill I want to bring to everyone's attention that had a public hearing earlier today is LD 640. This bill would ban single-use plastic bottles in the state of Maine. And everyone knows that we have a significant bottled water industry here in the state. Everyone thinks of Poland Spring, but there are other bottlers here in the state of Maine that employ directly thousands of individuals, and indirectly, when you add that on top of it, even more than that, tens of thousands of people across the state that work in the water bottling industry here in the state. LD 640 would ban the use of one-time plastic bottles, and that's just the wrong direction for the state of Maine. The committee heard a lot of testimony from folks that worked in that industry, but also when you think about it, we recycle here in the state of Maine. We have one of the best bottle programs in the state of Maine, and there's a lot of local redemption centers. If you take that out of the stream of recycling as well, you'd see a significant industry hit on some of the small businesses across the state of Maine. So this is a big issue, one that would be problematic for our economy here in the state of Maine, that no one else in the country has taken that step in terms of banning single-use bottled water. The other piece of this, though, that's important as well is that the University of Maine is doing a lot of great research on the next generation of plastic, bio-based plastic, coming from natural resource-based feedstock. And if we jumped ahead and banned plastic water bottles, we may be jumping ahead of the next technology of recycled plastic that can be made right here in Maine. So the Environment and Natural Resources held a public hearing on that bill earlier today, and they'll be working it. And hopefully we'll see that bill come out of committee, ought not to pass because of the negative impacts from not only Maine's economy, but for some of the key research that's being done right here in the state of Maine. So I know there's some things going on in tax as well, Linda, so I'll give it over to you.
Good afternoon, everyone. In taxation, tomorrow we have a public hearing. Actually, it's not in taxation, it's the IDEA committee. Tomorrow we have a public hearing on LD 730, which is going to extend the Pine Tree Zone Development Program. This program is set to expire this coming December of 21. The bill will extend it by 3 years. So it's really important to Maine's business community because this is one of our primary economic development programs. And it's available to certain sectors in the economy like biotech. And really what it does is it provides reduced taxes in a lot of different areas like sales tax exemptions and programs. So it's really important that this program be extended by 3 years. The other bills in taxation tomorrow, there's work sessions on 3 income tax bills that we adamantly opposed last week. These bills are LD 532, which would basically increase the top rate from 7.15 to 7.95 for if you meet a certain income threshold. The bill would provide a 10% income tax credit for other income thresholds, the lower income thresholds, like 60,000 for single, 90,000 for heads of household, and 120,000 for married filing jointly. The other 2 bills that we're adamantly opposed to really would impose a 3% surcharge on the higher incomes. LD 532 would impose a 5%, or I'm sorry, 498 would impose a 3% surcharge on incomes over 200,000. LD 570 would impose a 3% surcharge on income on extraordinary and capital gains and dividend income over certain thresholds, 250,000 for single, heads of household and married filing separately, and 500,000 for married filing jointly. So all 3 of these bills are very problematic for the Maine economy. They target wealth taxes. They are a number of bills that are out there. There's about a half a dozen more that haven't even been printed yet. We already testified on a couple other ones last week. So we're going to see these coming forth over the next a couple months. And they are, we adamantly oppose them. They threaten our economy. So Dana?
Yeah, well, thank you to all 3 of you. And for anyone that's viewing this program at the moment, please know that we welcome your input. We look forward to representing you in the legislature. And in that respect, if you have any question, anything that you'd like to know further about any of these issues, please let us know. You can reach us by going to our website, mainechamber.org. And these issues are all issues that can stymie some of the good news that we may have heard in that first segment. So it's important. We don't like to always bring you these issues that stand forth as barriers, but they are important if we want to achieve success. With that, let me try to reflect for a moment on what we've heard here today. And let me go back to 2020, because I think that was the year of the pandemic. And although we're not through with it yet, it set in motion for many of us looking back on 2020. Your reflections might well be the opening lines of Charles Dickens' classic, The Tale of Two Cities. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom, it was the age of foolishness. It was a season of light, it was a season of darkness. Well, maybe that's a little dramatic, but for many of you, I'll bet you thought that, whether it was Charles Dickens' words or your own feelings. But the program today, I think, recognizes that while it's not over, considerable progress has been made, that there are improvements. There is light at the tunnel. There is some definition on the road to recovery that we've been longing for. And probably today, many of you that may be watching it, while you're being very hopeful, you're not quite willing to state whether that glass is half full or it's half empty. I would argue it's more than half full, because I think that we all recognize that we're on the upswing. We know the vaccines are more prevalent, they're more available, and they're becoming more so every day. There's optimism in our tourism and throughout our business community. While it may not be universal, it's significant. And the statistics that you heard earlier speak to that. We also have a strategic plan who was created, and the Economic Recovery Committee set forth those issues through which we should be using as a lens for the bills in the legislature that help us grow our economy, but don't represent barriers as much as they do opportunity. So whether you're thinking of the glass half full or half empty, and I think there's always a tendency to focus more on the problems. And I'd argue that's not fair, really, because there are good things that are happening. Time doesn't allow me to go to all the others, but they're out there and they're important. But I'd also say that it begins with an attitude, your attitude, my attitude. It's an attitude that recognizes that attitude is directly related to consumer confidence. Consumer confidence is the foundation of economic success. And I'm not saying, as the words of that popular song years ago, don't worry, be happy. I'm not saying that at all. And I'm not saying we shouldn't be denying our challenges. As a matter of fact, we should be working together to overcome them. I'm simply saying that don't let the negative define who we are, what we do, or how we market ourselves to people outside the state. Attitude really does matter. Whether you're a clergy trying to reach into our heart to make us live a happier life, or whether you're the economist that's trying to reach into our head to say that it matters how you think, it matters what you do. And attitude is the foundational piece of that. The reason I say clergy and economists, because I've heard them use attitude either in a sermon or in speaking to a large group of people. And here are the words that they use. They're not my words, they're their words. And I think they borrow them from another person. And these are the words. The longer I live, the more I realize the impact of attitude on life. Life is more important to me than facts, more important than past experience or money, than circumstances, success, or failure, than what other people think, say, or do. Attitude is more important than giftedness, appearance, or skill. It will make or break a company, a church, a family, or a home. And the remarkable thing about attitude is each and every day, we have a choice regarding the attitude we will use for that day. We can't change the past. We can't change the fact that people act in a certain way. We can't change the inevitable. The only thing that we can do is to play on the one string that's available to us. That is our attitude. Life is 10% what happens to me and 90% how I react to it. So it is with you, it is with me. We are in charge of our attitude. I thank you for being with us today. I thank our sponsors. I thank our guests, and I thank all of you. Be kind to yourself and be kind to one another. See you next week, Monday at 3 o'clock. Take care.